and cohorts. In the last episode, I stated in the description that I would explain the meaning for the name of this series. It's all happening in front of us. We're all the movie. So how does this relate to the book or essay that I'm reading, The Power of the Powerless? In my view, Vaclav Havel talks about the greengrocer. And when he does that, he's talking about many of us. His story of the greengrocer embodies what he witnessed during that turbulent time in Eastern Europe in the 60s and the 70s. I see many parallels between what he describes and today. Therefore, my hope is that in sharing this essay, it will embolden people to realize that while it may seem we are watching a movie, we are also part of the movie. And further, how we respond creates our future. Clearly, when we don't pay attention, history repeats itself. So I hope that makes sense. And if you're someone who isn't sure where the terminology about the movie comes from, I'll offer a brief clarification. There is a certain group that has been a large talk in the media for the last few years, a certain letter of the alphabet, number 17, that many of us are very familiar with, who was known to say that in a reminder, we are just watching a movie. I believe what was meant by that, or what is meant by that, is that much of the negative activity that's coming to light today with our leaders and people in the mainstream, such as celebrities in Hollywood and around the globe. So much of the negative activity that we see coming to light was actually known about years ago, and that we are now simply watching that play out in the public view in order to help others become aware so that we can make change. So I would hope that if we can come to the realization that we are all part of the movie every day, and everything that we do does impact our future and our present, that this will again embolden people to take action in a positive way by how they react and how they choose to make decisions, as opposed to the term of we're just watching a movie, encouraging people to just sit back and watch the movie and eat their popcorn. We do need to take some action, in my opinion. We are part of this world, and we should try to remember that. So with that, I will continue reading the book. Thank you.
Chapter 7. Let us now imagine that one day something in our greengrocer snaps, and he stops putting up the slogans merely to ingratiate himself. He stops voting in elections he knows are a farce. He begins to say what he really thinks at political meetings, and he even finds the strength in himself to express solidarity with those whom his conscience commands him to support. In this revolt, the greengrocer steps out of living within the lie. He rejects the ritual and breaks the rules of the game. He discovers once more his suppressed identity and dignity. He gives his freedom a concrete significance. His revolt is an attempt to live within the truth. The bill is not long in coming. He will be relieved of his post as manager of the shop, and transferred to the warehouse. His pay will be reduced. His hopes for a holiday in Bulgaria will evaporate. His children's access to higher education will be threatened. His superiors will harass him, and his fellow workers will wonder about him. Most of those who apply these sanctions, however, will not do so from an authentic inner conviction, but simply under pressure from conditions. The same conditions that once pressured the greengrocer to display the official slogans. They will persecute the greengrocer either because it is expected of them, or to demonstrate their loyalty, or simply as part of the general panorama, to which belongs an awareness that this is how situations of this sort are dealt with, that this is in fact how things are always done, particularly if one is not to become suspect oneself. The executors, therefore, behave essentially like everyone else, to a greater or lesser degree, as components of the post-totalitarian system, as agents of its automatism, as petty instruments of the social auto-totality. Thus, the power structure, through the agency of those who carry out the sanctions, those anonymous components of the system, will spew the greengrocer from its mouth. The system, through its alienating presence in people, will punish him for his rebellion. It must do so because the logic of its automatism and self-defense dictate it. The greengrocer has not committed a simple individual offense, isolated in its own uniqueness, but something incomparably more serious. By breaking the rules of the game, he has disrupted the game as such. He has exposed it as a mere game. He has shattered the world of appearances, the fundamental pillar of the system. He has upset the power structure by tearing apart what holds it together. He has demonstrated that living a lie is living a lie. He has broken through the exalted facade of the system and exposed the real base foundations of power. He has said that the emperor is naked. And because the emperor is in fact naked, something extremely dangerous has happened. By his action, the greengrocer has addressed the world. He has enabled everyone to peer behind the curtain. He has shown everyone that it is possible to live within the truth. Living within the lie can constitute the system only if it is universal. The principle must embrace and permeate everything. There are no terms whatsoever on which it can coexist with living within the truth, and therefore everyone who steps out of line denies it in principle and threatens it in its entirety. This is understandable. As long as appearance is not confronted with reality, it does not seem to be appearance. As long as living a lie is not confronted with living the truth, the perspective needed to expose its mendacity is lacking. As soon as the alternative appears, however, it threatens the very existence of appearance and living a lie in terms of what they are, both their essence and their all-inclusiveness. And at the same time, it is utterly unimportant how large a space this alternative occupies. Its power does not consist in its physical attributes, but in the light it casts on those pillars of the system and on its unstable foundations. After all, the greengrocer was a threat to the system, not because of any physical or actual power he had, but because his action went beyond itself, because it illuminated its surroundings, and of course, because of the incalculable consequences of the illumination. In the post-totalitarian system, therefore, living within the truth has more than a mere existential dimension, returning humanity to its inherent nature, or a noetic dimension, revealing reality as it is, or a moral dimension, setting an example for others. It also has an unambiguous political dimension. If the main pillar of the system is living a lie, then it is not surprising that the fundamental threat to it is living the truth. This is why it must be suppressed more severely than anything else. In the post-totalitarian system, truth, in the widest sense of the word, has a very special import, one unknown in other contexts. In this system, truth plays a far greater, and above all, a far different role as a factor of power or as an outright political force. How does the power of truth operate? How does truth as a factor of power work? How can its power as power be realized? Chapter 8. Individuals can be alienated from themselves only because there is something in them to alienate. The terrain of this violation is their authentic existence. Living the truth is thus woven directly into the texture of living a lie. It is the repressed alternative, the authentic aim to which living a lie is an authentic response. Only against this background does living a lie make any sense. It exists because of that background. In its excusatory, chimerical rootedness in the human order, it is a response to nothing other than the human predisposition to truth. Under the orderly surface of the life of lies, therefore, there slumbers the hidden sphere of life in its real aims, of its hidden openness to truth. The singular, explosive, incalculable political power of living within the truth resides in the fact that living openly within the truth has an ally, invisible to be sure, but omnipresent, this hidden sphere. It is from this sphere that life lived openly in the truth grows. It is to this sphere that it speaks, and in it that it finds understanding. This is where the potential for communication exists. But this place is hidden and therefore, from the perspective of power, very dangerous. The complex ferment that takes place within it grows on in semi-darkness, and by the time it finally surfaces into the light of day as an assortment of shocking surprises to the system, it is usually too late to cover them up in the usual fashion. Thus, they create a situation in which the regime is confounded, invariably causing panic and driving it to react in inappropriate ways. It seems that the primary breeding ground for what might, in the widest possible sense of the word, be understood as an opposition in the post-totalitarian system is living within the truth. The confrontation between these opposition forces and the powers that be, of course, will obviously take a form essentially different from that typical of an open society or a classical dictatorship. Initially, this confrontation does not take place on the level of real, institutionalized, quantifiable power, which relies on the various instruments of power, but on a different level altogether. The level of human consciousness and conscience, the existential level. The effective range of this special power cannot be measured in terms of disciples, voters, or soldiers, because it lies spread out in the fifth column of social consciousness, in the hidden aims of life in human beings' repressed longing for dignity and fundamental rights, for the realization of their real social and political interests. Its power, therefore, does not reside in the strength of definable political or social groups, but chiefly in the strength of a potential which is hidden throughout the whole of society, including the official power structure of that society. Therefore, this power does not rely on soldiers of its own, but on the soldiers of the enemy, as it were. That is to say, on everyone who is living within the lie and who may be struck at any moment, in theory at least, by the force of truth, or who, out of an instinctive desire to protect their position, may at least adapt to that force. It is a bacteriological weapon, so to speak, utilized when conditions are ripe by a single civilian to disarm an entire division. This power does not participate in any direct struggle for power. Rather, it makes its influence felt in the obscure arena of being itself. The hidden movements it gives rise to there, however, can issue forth. When, where, under what circumstances, and to what extent are difficult to predict, in something visible, a real political act or event, a social movement, a sudden explosion of civil unrest, a sharp conflict inside an apparently monolithic power structure, or simply an irrepressible transformation in the social and intellectual climate. And since all genuine problems and matters of critical importance are hidden beneath a thick crust of lies, it is never quite clear when the proverbial last straw will fall or what that straw will be. This, too, is why the regime prosecutes, almost as a reflex action, preventively, even the most modest attempts to live within the truth. Why was Solzhenitsyn driven out of his own country? Certainly not because he represented a unit of real power, that is, not because any of the regime's representatives felt he might unseat them and take their place in government. Solzhenitsyn's expulsion was something else. A desperate attempt to plug up the dreadful wellspring of truth, a truth which might cause incalculable transformations in social consciousness, which in turn might one day produce political debacles unpredictable in their consequences. And so the post-totalitarian system behaved in a characteristic way. It defended the integrity of the world of appearances in order to defend itself. For the crust presented by the life of lies is made of strange stuff. As long as it seals off hermetically the entire society, it appears to be made of stone. But the moment someone breaks through in one place, when one person cries out, "The emperor is naked," when a single person breaks the rules of the game, thus exposing it as a game, everything suddenly appears in another light, and the whole crust seems then to be made of a tissue on the point of tearing and disintegrating uncontrollably. When I speak of living within the truth, I naturally do not have in mind only products of conceptual thought, such as a protest or a letter written by a group of intellectuals. It can be any means by which a person or group revolts against manipulation, anything from a letter by intellectuals to a workers' strike, from a rock concert to a student demonstration, from refusing to vote in farcical elections to making an open speech at some official congress, or even a hunger strike, for instance. If the suppression of the aims of life is a complex process, and if it is based on the multifaceted manipulation of all expressions of life, then, by the same token, every free expression of life indirectly threatens the post-totalitarian system politically, including forms of expression to which, in other social systems, no one would attribute any potential political significance, not to mention explosive power. The Prague Spring is usually understood as a clash between two groups on the level of real power: those who wanted to maintain the system as it was, and those who wanted to reform it. It is frequently forgotten, however, that this encounter was merely the final act and the inevitable consequence of a long drama originally played out chiefly in the theater of the spirit and the conscience of society. And that somewhere at the beginning of this drama, there were individuals who were willing to live within the truth, even when things were at their worst. These people had no access to real power, nor did they aspire to it. The sphere in which they were living, the truth, was not necessarily even that of political thought. They could equally have been poets, painters, musicians, or simply ordinary citizens who were able to maintain their human dignity. Today it is naturally difficult to pinpoint when and through which hidden, winding channel a certain action or attitude influenced a given milieu, and to trace the virus of truth as it slowly spread through the tissue of life, the life of lies, gradually causing it to disintegrate. One thing, however, seems clear. The attempt at political reform was not the cause of society's reawakening, but rather the final outcome of that reawakening. I think the present also can be better understood in the light of this experience. The confrontation between 1,000 Chartists and the post-totalitarian system would appear to be politically hopeless. This is true, of course, if we look at it through the traditional lens of the open political system, in which, quite naturally, every political force is measured chiefly in terms of the positions it holds on the level of real power. Given that perspective, a mini party like the Charter would certainly not stand a chance. If, however, this confrontation is seen against the background of what we know about power in the post-totalitarian system, it appears in a fundamentally different light. For the time being, it is impossible to say with any precision what impact the appearance of Charter 77, its existence, and its work has had in the hidden sphere, and how the Charter's attempt to rekindle civic self-awareness and confidence is regarded there. Whether, when, and how this investment will eventually produce dividends in the form of specific political changes is even less possible to predict. But that, of course, is all part of living within the truth. As an existential solution, it takes individuals back to the solid ground of their own identity. As politics, it throws them into a game of chance where the stakes are all or nothing. For this reason, it is undertaken only by those for whom the former is worth risking the latter, or who have come to the conclusion that there is no other way to conduct real politics in Czechoslovakia today, which, by the way, is the same thing. This conclusion can be reached only by someone who is unwilling to sacrifice his or her own human identity to politics, or rather, who does not believe in a politics that requires such a sacrifice. The more thoroughly the post-totalitarian system frustrates any rival alternative on the level of real power, as well as any form of politics independent of the laws of its own automatism, the more definitively the center of gravity of any potential political threat shifts to the area of the existential and pre-political, usually without any conscious effort. Living within the truth becomes the one natural point of departure for all activities that work against the automatism of the system. And even if such activities ultimately grow beyond the area of living within the truth, which means they are transformed into various parallel structures, movements, institutions, they begin to be regarded as political activity. They bring real pressure to bear on the official structures and begin, in fact, to have a certain influence on the level of real power. They always carry with them the specific hallmark of their origins. Therefore, it seems to me that not even the so-called dissident movements can be properly understood without constantly bearing in mind this special background from which they emerge. Chapter 9. The profound crisis of human identity brought on by living within a lie, a crisis which in turn makes such a life possible, certainly possesses a moral dimension as well. It appears, among other things, as a deep moral crisis in society. A person who has been seduced by the consumer value system, whose identity is dissolved in an amalgam of the accoutrement of mass civilization, and who has no roots in the order of being, no sense of responsibility for anything higher than his or her own personal survival, is a demoralized person. The system depends on this demoralization, deepens it, is in fact a projection of it into society. Living within the truth, as humanity's revolt against an enforced position, is, on the contrary, an attempt to regain control over one's own sense of responsibility. In other words, it is clearly a moral act, not only because one must pay so dearly for it, but principally because it is not self-serving. The risk may bring rewards in the form of a general amelioration in the situation, or it may not. In this regard, as I stated previously, it is an all-or-nothing gamble, and it is difficult to imagine a reasonable person embarking on such a course merely because he or she reckons that sacrifice today will bring rewards tomorrow, be it only in the form of general gratitude. By the way, The representatives of power invariably come to terms with those who live within the truth by persistently ascribing utilitarian motivations to them, a lust for power or fame or wealth, and thus they try at least to implicate them in their own world, the world of general demoralization. If living within the truth in the post-totalitarian system becomes the chief breeding ground for independent alternative political ideas, then all considerations about the nature and future prospects of those ideas must necessarily reflect this moral dimension as a political phenomenon. And if the revolutionary Marxist belief about morality as a product of the superstructure inhibits any of our friends from realizing the full significance of this dimension and, in one way or another, from including it in their view of the world, it is to their own detriment. An anxious fidelity to the postulates of that world view prevents them from properly understanding the mechanisms of their own political influence, thus paradoxically making them precisely what they, as Marxists, so often suspect others of being, victims of false consciousness. The very special political significance of morality in the post-totalitarian system is a phenomenon that is at the very least unusual in modern political history, a phenomenon that might well have, as I shall soon attempt to show, far-reaching consequences. And that concludes the recording for today, and I will see you next time. Thank you for listening, and if you appreciate this content, please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you.